So Moran, one of the things I want to talk about today is that we get calls from people all the time who are charged with a crime and they're saying, but I'm innocent, why do I need a lawyer? And the statistics really speak for themselves. Since 1989, 3,300 different exonerations have occurred. What that means is we're not talking about individuals that have been falsely convicted and imprisoned only. We're talking about people who've been falsely convicted and exonerated because of actual physical evidence that demonstrated that they were guilty, not just a strong suspicion of such.
Right, it really is, it's mind-blowing because you think about our criminal justice system and all the checks and balances that are written into the Constitution and the rules of procedure that are designed to ensure that this doesn't happen. The burden of proof that the government has is beyond a reasonable doubt. So what that means is a jury of 12 people has listened to the evidence at trial and concluded based on that evidence that there is no reasonable doubt remaining and that the person is in fact guilty when they're not. And so for those individuals who say, why do I need a lawyer if I've been accused of a crime? The reason is because you don't want to be among the 3,200 individuals and counting who have been convicted of crimes that they've never committed. And really, Ryan, the number is exponentially higher because the 3,300 case number relates only to a sliver of what we expect are the wrongful convictions that are the reality of this country. Because in those cases, there's been actual affirmative evidence, something you can point to, which excludes the possibility of the accused person being guilty. The reality is, in our experience, so many cases are tried based on testimony alone, where there is no sort of physical evidence you can point to, where based on the testimony that was admitted, the person was convicted. And there's no way to disprove it. And so the need to have an experienced lawyer handling your case is paramount, especially if you're innocent, so you don't end up among the number of people who are in prison and maybe dying in prison for crimes they've never committed. Right? What are some of the reasons why that there are so many people who are convicted of crimes they've never committed?
There are a variety of different reasons, and they're not all what you would expect if you were thinking about how could you end up there. One of the leading causes is false confessions. That's people going into the police department, being asked a series of questions, providing answers, and those answers being used against them. There's a spectrum in this area. There are people who give false statements saying, I committed a crime in which they actually didn't.
Right.
There's also just confessions in the sense of information that's been provided by the person who's accused or a suspect of the crime that's later used to shore up the government's case and used as evidence against them.
Right, so, just the latter example is something that we see all the time where, it's natural. You get into a fight and the police want to talk to you about it and you want to say, hey, this was self-defense. I was there and this is what the person did and I was only defending myself. Terrible decision. You don't need to prove self-defense on the street or in the police station. You need to prove self-defense in a court of law by having your lawyers establish that through their skill and experience. So by saying it was self-defense, what they're doing is they're excluding every other possible defense that the lawyer might have in order to prove the client's innocence. So, for example, by calling into question whether the client was ever there, properly identified, whether there was an alibi, any number of other factors. What they've done is sort of narrowed the scope of the trial to the defense that they think that they need to advance, when in fact that might not be the most effective defense to raise overall. What I really want to focus in on is the concept of an individual walking into a police station as an innocent man or woman and saying, I'm here to answer your questions, I'm here to establish that I'm innocent, and then walking out in handcuffs and never coming out of prison again. How does that happen, Ryan?
It's simple. It happens because that's what these investigations are designed in order to do. They're not designed to have a free general conversation with someone and find out where that goes. These investigations and these interrogations, they are designed to get to an end. They are designed in order to use a variety of techniques to get the results that they're looking for. One of the things that we see are coercive techniques, and the people come in and they are subject to the police using a variety of different techniques in order to get information out of them. Not to find out what the answer is, what the story is, what the real facts are.
It's not telling you your side of the story.
It is, I want to lead you down this different path. And that can be a variety of different ways. Some that don't seem like that they would be coercive. Minimizing someone's conduct in order to lull them into a false sense of security, or different offers to help. That saying you got to get in front of this, tell your side of the story, And what they're doing is boxing that person in.
Right. We see this all the time, and it's absolutely frightening. So what they'll do is they'll try to connect with the suspect. They'll say, "Geez, I understand a person in your shoes why something like this would happen. You never really stood a chance. You had a drug problem. If you tell us what happened, this is our opportunity to help you." They're not talking about the fact that what you're doing is you're implicating yourself in a potentially serious crime, but perhaps even a murder. They're saying, "We're going to help you get treatment," but the reality is they're helping to lock you up and throw away the key. So they might come in and act as if they're your friend and try to help you and lull you into this false sense of security, as Ryan pointed out. Another thing that they'll do is they'll use coercive and bullying interrogation tactics. And let me be very clear with you. The art of police interrogations is formidable. It is the greatest engine and greatest weapon toward securing convictions, regardless of guilt or innocence. And the techniques that they have are tried and true. There are classes about this. There's what's called the so-called read technique, which involves the minimization and offers of leniency, or really false statements in order to get people to believe that their only option is to go along with what the police say. So, for example, I've seen cases where a police officer will accuse somebody, say, of a robbery, and another police officer, it's staged, right? But the other police officer will come in with a CD and put it on the desk. And the officer conducting the interrogation says, "Oh, thanks for the video of the robbery." Okay, so... And what they're doing is they're creating an impression that they have that suspect on video camera committing a crime that person knows they didn't commit. But because of the overwhelming power of the false statements that police are making, it overcomes their will. It overcomes the suspect's will and causes them to admit to crimes that they never committed. You think that police are required to tell you the truth? You are absolutely wrong. They wrote the book on lying to people, and it's part of the read interrogation technique. It is the genesis of countless statements by suspects admitting to a crime, whether they did or they did not commit that crime. So Ryan, why don't you tell me a little bit more about some of the techniques that the police are using, like maybe depriving them of contact, isolating them, scaring them.
And so those are the big bad versions of what we're talking about. Keeping someone in a room for hours and just making them feel scared, alone, and unable to do something. But there are other sides of the coin. These interrogation rooms are painted different colors that psychologists say pink is more likely to have people feel at ease and then be able to lower their guard, and therefore more likely to provide information in that vein.
So think about the Central Park Five. I mean, these kids were subject to brutal interrogations, and we're talking about kids where the police just relentlessly tore down their resolve and their resistance, and the children eventually were without any defenses and ultimately were willing to say whatever the police wanted them to say. A terrible, terrible tragedy in this country. I mean, not just the technique, but the racial implications of that case are just astonishing. But a more recent example, you might have seen the Netflix special, Making a Murderer, where you can see sort of how it unfolds, the police interrogation of a young man who was factually innocent of the crime, but police were nevertheless, because of the techniques that they have, able to convince him to confess, imagine himself as the killer, and then ultimately admit to being the killer when in fact he wasn't.
So you don't have to wait until Netflix options the story in order to see this in our everyday life. There recently was a case where a child, a son, was suspected of killing his father. He was brought in, he gave a full statement, he ultimately confessed to the murder. Turns out father wasn't dead, he was alive. And this is an example, this is the greatest example of someone said something that wasn't true as a result of a variety of coercive, false, psychological techniques, all designed in order to do one thing, not find out who did the crime, but secure a confession.
Right, and so that brings me to the concept of what's called police misconduct. I think that there's a general, view, or maybe we as people would like to believe that the police are out there to protect us, and many of them are, and are doing a great job doing it. But there are also plenty of police officers that are willing to take shortcuts or bend the rules in order to get to the result that they want to get to, which is to convict somebody of a crime, whether or not that person is innocent.
So because this topic is just so huge and there's just so much that we can talk about, we wanted to break this down into a series of different videos to talk about the variety of different ways that people who are innocent of a crime still need a lawyer to challenge the government's evidence, to make sure that the evidence is legitimate, and really to just prevent against mistake and problems in the future.
Right, to make sure that you don't get convicted of a crime you never committed. So stay tuned.